and welcome to the Buckets and Tea NBA show. I'm your host, Cathryn Eicher. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. Joining me today, I have two special guests, okay? Because this is going to be my holiday special to you. Some extra fun times here. We've got with me, you know them, you love them. It's Chelsea Leite and Katie Heindl. Yay!
Hi.
All claps to not hurt your ears. So here's the deal. When this episode is, I keep saying airing, but that makes me realize like I'm from the world of TV, and it's really a premiere. A premiere. Is that how we phrase this? A launch? Like how do you refer to each episode? Because I keep saying airing, and I'm just aging myself out here.
It's just out.
It's out.
It's out.
Yeah.
It's just out.
It's out.
All right. I've probably used that lingo also, but all right. So this is going to come out on December 14th. We're recording this a week early because I'm going to be in Italy with or without a credit card. We don't know. I'm going through it. I spent more than an hour with customer service, hence, the lack of just looking nice for this podcast. It's fine. So here we are. And I have, two of my favorites here. And we're going to talk about our careers, our journey in the basketball world, and all that fun stuff. But first, we got to talk about something major because this morning, unbeknownst to us, the WNBA team name and logo got leaked. It got leaked. And here we are. We have it. We have to react to it. How could we not? It's called the Toronto Tempo. I'm sure you've seen it. It's a light blue with sort of a maroon colorway. We've got the text. We've got the lines. Who wants to jump in here? I feel like Chelsea, you've got some very strong opinions on this. What do you think?
Well, okay, I'm starting to question if I'm like colorblind or something because everybody keeps saying maroon and
I see purple.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't see maroon.
Yeah.
Like more burgundy.
Yeah, like a burgundy, but also like the purple side of burgundy.
Yeah, that's fair. It's in that spectrum.
I saw like also the Canadian Press posted something, and apparently they were like, yeah, like red and blue, and I was like, that's not red, that's purple. So I don't know. I just started questioning my eyesight now, which is like terrible to me.
Yeah, let's turn this logo into that white dress, blue dress debate.
Oh my goodness. No, I don't mean to turn those.
I saw blue and I still see blue. I think I saw the white one. Cathryn, we've talked about this before.
No, we haven't.
Yes, we certainly have. Like on the show, I'm realizing. I'm flashing back to it. I saw the white one like once and then I could never see it again.
Whoa. I don't remember this.
My tones were like,
But I believe you.
That's so wild. But yeah, I saw purple, which just makes me happy because I wanted purple. So like, okay, to get into my actual thoughts, I like the colors. I think the colors are nice. And the name has grown on me since I first heard it. Like at first I was like, took me a second, but now when I say it out loud, like Toronto Tempo, I like alliteration. I like the O's. I like, I think like out of some of the things that were considered, it's good. Because like there were things that were being thrown around that I was like, whoa. And it's also one that I didn't really hear like tossed around too much. That means it's not really like basic. But yeah, those are my like initial thoughts. Curious of what other, because I haven't really had like a discussion with in person with people. So I'm curious what you all think.
I mean, the logo is very New Balance adjacent, but I'm a New Balance fan anyway, so sure, I don't mind it. I do really like the colors. I feel like they're not colors that you necessarily see a lot, kind of in any franchise. I also see sort of a muted purple, and kind of a frosty, would you say like a frosty blue? Yeah. I like the colors. They're cool. The name, I like keep repeating to myself, like just to try and get used to it. But like you, Chelsea, I saw a lot of the earlier options, and they all seemed quite goofy to me. I like that they didn't name it after an animal. Like I like that it wasn't necessarily in conversation with the Raptors. They really wanted to be their own thing. I think they stressed that all throughout the process. Yeah, some of the suggested names were pretty goofy, so I'm glad that they didn't go with those. I do like a conceptual name, and honestly, at the end of the day, like every name is not good to begin with. Like the most storied franchises that we think of have the stupidest names, and you just get used to them. You know what I mean? Like you just become so well versed and associated with like the lore and iconography of these things that they mean something because of those things. They don't mean anything because of their names. Like I was a grade 5 like student voting for the Raptors name because Jurassic Park came out. It's like the goofiest way to name a team. But that's why I picked it. I was like, dinosaurs are sick. Jurassic Park ruled. I loved Raptors. Like, we need this. Like now I'm on the other side of that. I'm like, oh yeah, like that's what can happen when like fan-led voting goes wrong, right? So I don't know. Like even the Valkyries, like it's a hard name for what it actually means, but like it's still kind of a goofy name. All sports teams have goofy names at the beginning.
Yeah. Like you can't pick, like think about the other teams in the city, like the Maple Leafs, that's not even grammatically correct. So starting with that, the Raptors are named after a movie. Like it's, we just had this whole thing with the PWHL where people had opinions as well. It's hard to name a sports team. Like you have to think about trademarks that are already out there. Literally everybody's in my DM saying it should have been the Huskies. Probably wasn't allowed to be.
Did no one think about the implications of just like a women's basketball team being called like I don't even want to finish the thought.
There's the Yukon Huskies.
Yeah, but just like that was the first thing I thought. I was like, it's going to be so easy for people, for like idiots, to take this and run with it. So
exactly. So there was that one that kept getting tossed. Everybody kept saying some sort of dinosaur-esque thing. I'm like, no.
Can you imagine?
Like, no, thank you. The big one that I was so glad that got cut was Towers. I hated that one. I did not like that one.
So, I feel like
there were so many more worse options that I was so much more mad about.
Yeah, all the ones they posted that were sort of on the quote unquote cutting room floor, I'm glad we're there. I feel like the name Tempo, as I'm hearing it more, I am getting used to the name also. I do like the alliteration. I think the look is to, like you said, New Balance, but also Pacers adjacent. Also to me, like, on my WNBA podcast, I've been very critical of the Indiana Fever name. I think that's one of the worst names in sports, like Who Wants a Fever? And maybe they had an opportunity like pre-Caitlin Clark to change it, but I think that ship has sailed now. But to me, I'm like, they should have been the Tempo.
Pacers and the Tempo, that would have actually...
because those two names actually make sense. Not that Indiana's known for having like rhythm per se, although the Jackson family's from Indiana. Indiana, shout out. So maybe
also Toronto doesn't, like, it has no affiliation with Toronto either. And
no, there's no connection to the
don't get me wrong, like I'm glad they didn't go something like super cheesy Canada, because like there were a few suggestions and I was like, no, like we can't do that.
Like Northern Star or something.
Yeah. Like, no. But so I'm glad it was that, but then like to see them completely just like abandon that. I do understand that the name is the same in French and English, which I think is,
that's, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So like there was a few things where I'm like, okay, you can see that they wanted something that like made sense in French, and that, and I am glad that my biggest thing with the Toronto Scepters is the fact that they picked something that is differently spelled in Canada than it is in America. And with being like one of the only teams in Canada, you have American media, like it kind of just, so I'm glad that they didn't pick something that was spelled differently in Canada, like the Scepters. So, I mean, yeah, there's like, again, there's so many pros and cons, and I think people just like immediately like cling to the negative stuff. So I don't know.
I agree. Like the name itself, I think will grow on all of us. Just like, like Katie was saying with all the iconography, like LA Lakers has never made sense. But
because it started in Minnesota.
And they don't even have lakes in LA, but it doesn't matter anymore. You know what I mean? Because they just are the Lakers, and it doesn't even mean like a word anymore. It's just like their team name. I will say about the colors, like and dislike the colors at the same time. So here's the thing. I like them because I like the colorway itself. Like just looking at those two colors together, I like it. And, shout out to Roots, who's going to be the official clothing sponsor I saw. And I'm like, Roots is going to make a very nice leather jacket with these colors.
And sweatsuit.
And sweatsuits. And
Yeah.
Roots is going to do a really good job making nice merch with these colors.
Yeah.
The downside is I don't associate these colors with the word tempo.
What
you know what I mean?
Like
when you think
with speed.
Well, when you think of tempo, you think of like I think of brighter colors, truthfully. You know what I mean?
Like tempo, a racing color?
They had that thing there about the music notes and stuff. And it's like, well, if I'm thinking about tempo and I'm thinking about music, I'm not thinking of these like muted colors. Like, you know what I mean? Like I would think like with a name like tempo, I would have thought of like maybe like a gray with like a lime green and something else. You know what I mean? Like something like that to me makes more sense with the word tempo. Yeah, like a pink or even like a sharper like orange or purple or something. There's a lot of orange in the WNBA, but like brighter colors to me I associate more with the word tempo, in my opinion.
I think that like the merch is going to look really, really good on streetwear.
Yes.
Like is great because a lot of sports streetwear is like not it. Like I think about if the Indiana Fever colors were on streetwear, and I like probably wouldn't wear it.
What are theirs, like navy blue and red?
And
and a bit of
yellow
and yellow. It's like all the primary colors.
Yeah. So like that's
basically what they did was they took like a scope and looked at what a fever looks like, and then they were just like, those are the colors.
In my opinion, I'm like, this colorway is gonna look so good on clothes and like probably on jerseys, I hope. Like,
yeah,
the jerseys
it will look nice.
The colors are good. I think the colors are probably the strongest thing. Other than like how clean, like I will say, like the logo is quite clean, and I'm glad they didn't go this like futuristic authoritarian like animal route like we've seen all the logos kind of go into. Or it's just like the Valkyries logo is kind of like that. It's like it almost everything looks like it could be a privatized police like forces logo,
or like a superhero logo.
Yeah, like I'm glad they didn't go that way.
Valkyries logo yet.
It's like that triangle.
Even the Liberty's like kind of like that now. Like a lot of NBA teams have
it's like a Viking scepter, isn't it? The Valkyries.
Kind of. It's just like a V.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a V.
It looks like a superhero crest to me.
I like the Valkyries. I like that name. I like its adjacency with the Warriors. I like the purple. I don't know.
I like everything about them. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I think there's that trend in sports logos.
Yeah, I will say, like
in every league.
Yeah, it is hard to name a team, and I was kind of prepared to dislike the team name no matter what it was going to be. Like, I was prepared to have like some sort of adverse reaction. But I will say, I think the one team that has, I think maybe the perfect name is the New York Liberty. I think it's the perfect name. It direct connection to the city, also a symbol of all the things you want to be, associated with. And I also think that you know what I mean. It's like
I have a different opinion.
Oh, you don't like it?
No, I do like it. I do think there's a one better one though. I think the Seattle Storm.
You think that's better?
Because it's like, again, alliteration. Storm is like tough, strong, whatever.
Yeah.
And then Seattle is like known for having a lot of
it's known for being rainy.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's true.
It's simple. It's easy. It sounds nice. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the Liberty too, what I also like about it is that like that copper teal color isn't anywhere else in sports, at least in North America. You know what I mean? Like it's very like distinct. But anyway, I do like the tempo colors. The name will grow on me. Roots, I look forward to the Letterman jacket. I want it. I will wear it with a dress. You better make it in an extra large or I'll be really pissed. And yeah, it's exciting times either way. I mean, I'm excited that this team exists. It's got a name now. That's really cool. And I think, if it's anything like the Raptors, which it won't be, but if it's anything like the Raptors at all, we're going to see this thing evolve over time. Like people hated that dinosaur for so long. They were like, what about a jersey with no dinosaur? And then people were like, hey, man, you got to bring the dinosaur back. You know what I mean? Like, it's been a journey, and you know, considering how hard this is, I don't think they did a bad job.
Yeah.
All right.
So many things are taken.
Yeah. Let's move on to what this episode was actually supposed to be about. So our holiday special of sorts. So I want to Katie, I'll start with you. What I want to ask you, like, what inspired you to pursue a career in basketball?
Jeez.
Why are you so
I don't know. You're like, I knew we were going to talk about this. I'm like, how could I ever answer that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it was always a roundabout thing, right? It was like, to be quite honest, it was exhausting. A lot of other routes that I thought I saw myself moving in career-wise. If not exhausting, then every kind of career road I took eventually led me back in a roundabout way to writing, for starters. I think that first and foremost. And basketball, because that was just something I've loved my whole life. And I never, like, for a long time was pretty trepidatious or did not think to put the two of those things together. So again, I think all of these sort of, like, I don't want to call them missteps because I do think they were necessary, but every other circuitous route I took pushed me in a direction of, like, well, why do you keep coming back to the same place? You know, like, you got to at some point start paying attention to signals that life gives you. And I mean, to be quite honest, when I started writing about basketball, I noticed, like,
you're disappearing.
The light? Sorry, the sun is going down outside the window. We're in deep winter podcast mode.
Yes,
it's not even winter yet. We haven't even hit the solstice. Anyway, that there was a lot of gaps in coverage in terms of how I talked about basketball and how I wanted to write about basketball and what I actually saw available and what was interesting to me. And not just me, to the people that, like, to my friends, to people I, went to games with, to people I talked about it with. I'm like, we're not really doing coverage this way, specifically like basketball's intersections with culture, politics, history, athlete autonomy, like, these broader topics that I broach most of the time in my work. And I guess I realized pretty quickly I had a niche I need to turn, like, a light on.
It's great.
This is so dramatic.
This
is like a dramatic play.
I love it.
Yeah, it's ghost stories with Katie right now.
And then I realized
ghost stories of being a woman.
It was 1920. And
oh man.
Anyway, so again, I think for me, it wasn't so much that, like, I had some lightning crack realization one day and was like, this is what I should be doing. But I'd always made time and found ways to write outside of all the other day jobs I had. So I knew that's something that I wanted to be doing. And then I found, when I kept writing about basketball, I'm like, maybe I'll run out of things to say. And, like, that would be a good signal to be like, this is not something that can really sustain me, but I haven't yet. So.
Well, the NBA has done a really good job making sure that we never run out of things to say. So that's also really helpful. And I agree, like, Katie, like, your writing has absolutely fulfilled a gap, if you will. Like, it's definitely entered the space in a way that nothing else existed before. So good on you. Chelsea, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty honest with the fact that my fall into sports has been completely random and was definitely not expected and definitely not planned on my part. I mean, again, I'm, like, very open about the fact that I went into my career wanting to be in, like, television and media and just, like, didn't really know where I fit into that world. I grew up in a town and, like, in a high school and environment where writing was definitely not presented as, like, a career option for me. So I didn't discover that that was something I could do until I was halfway through my bachelor's degree and realized that I could, like, major in English and, like, pursue a career in writing. And then ultimately, wanted to write media and television and all of that stuff. And so I went and tried to do that and worked in television for a few years. And obviously the pandemic kind of, like, took that into a weird thing. But even before that, like, I was working as a production assistant on these really huge budget television shows, but they were American TV shows that were being serviced in Canada. And so there wasn't really a path for me to go into the writing rooms because those were happening in LA and we were shooting in Toronto. And so I had jobs like, and I mean, we'll talk a little bit more in depth, but I was a production assistant, I was a stunts coordinator, and I was doing all these things, working these like 12-hour days on set. And then I would write at night, and I would do improv classes on the weekend, and I would do all of these things, and like was trying so hard to get into like a writing situation. And then the pandemic happened and nothing was happening in terms of writing, and nobody knew when TV shows were going to be able to come back to Canada and all that stuff. And so I just kind of like turned to the internet and was so unemployed for a while, and was watching a lot of basketball because it was like something I really liked as a kid, and then kind of fell off of it in high school. And then when I moved back to Toronto, when I moved to Toronto, was just so big in the culture, and was something, again, in my small town that wasn't as big at the time. And so, yeah, just kind of got swept into that culture and started talking about it online. And then the DM that changed my entire life happened. Josh Kern of Raptors HQ decided to slide into my DMs and be like, hey, do you want to write on our blog? And I was like, I've never written about sports before. And he was like, I don't care. You're funny. And I like your Twitter, and you seem to know stuff about media, and we could use like a different voice. And so I just started doing that and started following people like Katie, who were taking like a different approach to sports writing that wasn't just like X's and O's and bro talk, and was really intersecting it with things that I cared about, like politics and culture and women and all of this stuff. And so like I was really inspired by that, and really inspired to like not just write about sports, but write about basketball in a way that was intriguing to me and intriguing to people who didn't necessarily know that much about basketball. And that just grew and grew, and I started getting more and more opportunities and more people reaching out to me, and was still working like 4 jobs until literally 2024. And now have kind of just like branched out into women's sports and WNBA and women's college basketball and podcasting and all that stuff. And it was truly the most random thing to ever happen in my life. And again, to what Katie said, like sometimes you just have to take the signs that life is giving you. And I never intentionally went this way, but I just like kept happening, and more things kept falling on my plate, and more opportunities kept happening. And before I knew it, I was basically pursuing a full-time freelance writing career after like not knowing what to do with my life for a few years in between there. So yeah, it's been very unexpected and very just like not what I intended. Like if you would have asked me like 5 years ago, like even going into the pandemic, like what I thought my life would turn out after, definitely wouldn't have said this, but here we are.
That's really cool. I fell into my stand-up comedy career. I had no intentions of ever doing stand-up comedy, and then I wanted to get into writing more, and I took a class with Paul Bellini. Shout out to Paul Bellini. And it was like the sketch comedy class. And I was more interested in learning how to write sketches than like performing them. But part of this class assignment was to also do a monologue. So we put together a little class show, as you do. And I did this monologue. And then Paul was like, Cathryn, like, you need to do stand-up comedy. And I was like, oh, haha, like, thanks, Paul. Thought nothing of it. And then he emailed me after the class was over, and he was like, Cathryn, I'm serious. You should do stand-up. So then whenever I see him now, I joke with him, and I thank him for, quote, ruining my life. But
Cathryn, you're the funniest stand-up comedian I've ever seen.
Oh, that's so nice.
You really are.
You.
I was so impressed the first time I saw you. I was like, I was truly floored, because I feel like with a lot of stand-up, at least I am like, I have like some anxiousness when the show starts. I'm like, this could be really bad, you know? And you quickly like took that. It's like you took my hand, and I was like, I know where she's going with everything. It was great.
Aw, that's really sweet.
It's funny because the last comedy set I did before COVID happened, I had this whole bit about like Raptors, like the Raptors, and I wasn't even working in sports at that point. And it's funny, sometimes I look back and I'm like, I wonder if I could like kind of predict where my life was going in like a weird psychic kind of way. But yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've done jokes about the Raptors too.
Mainly your Nick Nurse. Yeah, your Nick Nurse material is great.
I mean, in terms of like sports and broadcasting for myself, like I realized as a comedian I needed to do more than just stand up, because I don't want to tour. My back hurts thinking about it because, because you're broke for a long time as a comic, right? And it's like when you're touring, it's like you're self-funded. You're asking to crash on other comedians' couches and this, that, and the other. And it's like, I just turned 40. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have the energy for this. Like, if I had started comedy when I was younger, I think it could have been different. But I was like, no, like, I love writing. That's how I got into this in the first place. I want to be a writer, blah, blah, blah. But I've also had a love for basketball my whole life too. And, please, I hope this doesn't turn anybody off. I was very inspired by Bill Simmons. Okay. And I'll explain why. It's not because I like everything he says or agree with all his points of view, but he changed sports broadcasting in terms of like having the fan perspective be relevant. And I was like, every woman that does this changing now, but I was thinking before, like every woman who does this is like, she's got to be the smartest person in the room. She needs to be a former athlete or somehow adjacent to sports, usually a deep speaking voice, like just a very authoritative presence, you know what I mean? And it's like, I love that they're there, but I feel like now that they were there, there's room to have a female voice that's a bit different. And that's where I was like, let's come in, let's have fun with the game, let's have fun with basketball, because to me that's the whole point of all of this, is to have fun, where it's like we can laugh about it, not take it too seriously, still be knowledgeable, but sort of find that in between. So that was sort of my goal in starting the show.
Yeah.
And here we are.
You've done it.
Still doing the show. Okay. My next question. Okay. What were some of our past jobs? Chelsea, you started to name a few, but this whole question was inspired by the fact that you worked at African Lion Safari as a driver. And now we probably could talk for an entire hour.
Yeah.
Just about your experiences at African Lion Safari. And to my, to my detriment, that should have been the holiday episode, is just used for a whole hour about that. But you had some jobs in production. Give us like a story from one of your past jobs.
Oh man, yeah. It's funny because like I've just kind of like done a bunch of these jobs, and now that I like start talking about them in like a past sense, now that I'm a bit more removed, I have people who are like, you have the most random stories I've ever heard in my entire life, which is hilarious to me because like I just end up in these situations, like I didn't, so whatever. So yeah, my job history, I mean, my parents owned a business when I was younger. So, I mean, I was just kind of like working, and I worked at McDonald's. I've been a cashier, and then African Lion Safari was just so random. I applied online, and it was the middle of the summer, and they had someone like get fired or quit. And they were like, hey, come drive a boat and a train and a bus. Okay. And I was 18. Yeah, I was 18 years old and driving a 52-person long bus through this like private property in Cambridge, Ontario, looking at lions and giraffes and having monkeys drive on my car. And yeah, I had that job. I was also a tour guide for like kids' school trips. So I would go with like kids to like Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, Halifax, Boston, New York City. And my sweet, sweet mother, shout out to my mom, she would drive me to these schools like every Monday, and I would just get on these buses and go to these random cities with these like grade 8s, and they would do the most heinous things. I once had a private school group of kids, and as a prank, they ordered like $400 worth of pizza to their teacher's hotel room, and the teacher was like, we didn't order this pizza, and the pizza was there, and it was a whole thing, and these kids like borderline got sent home from the trip, and I was just sitting there like, that's low-key so funny. But like I couldn't say that. Yeah, I once was
That's such a rich kid prank.
It is. Yeah.
Oh my god. I didn't have access to $400 for any of that.
Exactly. He knew how to do that. But yeah, another time I was in Boston with 140 8th graders, and we went whale watching, and the weather was so bad that every single kid got seasick, and there were kids puking over the thing, and there were kids puking in the garbage can, and there were kids puke, and the poor employees on this boat were trying to like hand out ginger candies and like puke bags, and I was just sitting there like, what is my life right now? And we went and we saw whales, and I came back, and then I treated myself to the biggest bread bowl of clam chowder I can find in Boston.
Why would you want to eat that out of all the things?
She didn't get sick.
I didn't get sick. I felt sick. I didn't get sick, but I'm built different. It's my island blood, I guess. But so that
you are built different, Chelsea.
Built different. But
that's the last thing I would have wanted to eat.
Yeah, so that was all before I graduated college, and then I started working in television and worked on like Big Brother and was a stand-in on Amazing Race for a few days and worked on American Gods, which was this like $10 million an episode show, and was the stunts coordinator for a Kevin Hart movie and like all of this stuff. So then when I started going into sports, like especially my family was just kind of like, oh, okay, like sure. What else can you do at this point? And so, yeah, I think just like all of that maybe led me to being more open-minded and more adaptable to things. And, you know, athletes, I guess, didn't really faze me at that point because I had to like, one time I accidentally parked in Woody Harrelson's parking spot at the X and like had to move my car, like just random stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely have like the most random resume ever, but the African lion safari thing, driver, like I will boots
that
down.
Should never leave your resume.
Yeah, I'm the best driver in my family, and I will take that to the grave because I can drive a school bus.
Listen, I believe you.
And one time I watched a bison give birth.
Oh,
so that's there's so many random I was about to
from the driver's seat of a school bus, no less.
Yeah, from the driver's seat of a school bus. It was while we were still doing training, so there was no one in my school bus, and I was just sitting there by myself, like it's giving birth.
Insane.
Yeah, I've had giraffes lick my windshield. I've had kids like they used to bring like camps to African lion safari, like of like 4-year-old kids, but it's springtime and it's also mating season. So you go through every spot in the African lion safari and it's just like lions doing the deed, giraffe doing the deed, buffaloes doing the deed. And it's like all of these little kids like asking me what's happening and I don't know what I'm allowed to tell them. Anyways.
You're just the driver. You don't.
I'm just the driver.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a really uncomfortable pair of khaki boots, khaki shorts, khaki shirt. And like I have like a plastic stick in my nose because I wasn't allowed to have a nose ring. So every day I would take it out and put one of those plastic spacers in it.
Oh, what's the point?
I was working, and I was like 18, 19 at the time. So I was working like 12-hour days on no sleep because I would go out afterwards with my friends, just absolutely being a degenerate and getting paid like dirt cheap. And they would also like give us an extra $1 at the end of every season for every hour we worked if we never missed a day of work. So I would go in at any situation. I was like, did I just come from a bush party a couple hours ago? Yes. But now I'm at African Lion Safari and we're here to work and drive the school bus. So that's, I guess, my like very short-winded resume.
That's insane.
And now I work in sports.
Katie.
Yeah. I'm not trying to think. I guess my first job was as a child DJ because my dad was a DJ for his career.
This ended up being way more interesting than I thought it would be.
So he had like put my brother and I to work early at like kids' Christmas parties. But then once we were teenagers, we would go on the road with him and do jobs like all over North America.
Your dad was also a DJ.
My dad was only a DJ. That was his job.
Cool.
Yeah. My dad has some crazy stories about so my dad started DJing. He had to like build all his own equipment. There were no DJs, like it was in, the 70s. So if he's DJing a wedding, he built by hand these like belt driven turntables because the equipment didn't exist yet. Sorry, there's a cat. Anyway, he told me some crazy stories about like wedding bands slashing his tires because they were like, "You're coming for our business." Like
well,
it was like in a weird way, right? But it's I don't know. We joke about it now, and it's like one of those jobs that he existed in the right exact time frame that you could have a job, like you could become self-employed, own a company, have like a very successful company with like upwards of 20 people working for you. Whereas now everyone's like, I'll just plug in my phone, like
yeah.
Anyway, let's see, to Chelsea's. When I was in college, I was a mascot a couple times because my brother
What?
worked for 1-800 mascots. So he would call me if they needed, like, I went to school. I went to Dalhousie for a couple of years, and I went to Concordia. So he would be like, "We need someone to drop the puck at like the World Junior Hockey Tournament as like the SO Tiger. Can you do it?" So I went out to Cape Breton for that. Once I was Count Chocula for like World Literacy Day.
I love this.
It was like
Cathryn,
a good,
you really picked two good people to
good
come
way
on.
to make money. Yeah, while I was in
Who
school.
knew?
Yeah.
After school, when I moved back to Toronto, I didn't think I would actually stay that long. I had plans to move to New York, and then I got an internship at Vice in like Vice's infancy. In the Toronto office, there were about 5 of us, and then I started working there. I started as the office manager, and then I moved into events and also editorial because they had no one running their like online editorial platforms at that time. So I did both, and then I was the director of events across Canada when I left, and still doing a lot of editorial work on the magazine and with all the other verticals. Cathryn, I don't know if you remember, maybe you do too, Chelsea, but it was when they had first launched, like, they had Munchies, they had Broadly, which was like their women's vertical, which was unfortunately very short-lived. And then they had Vice Sports as well. But I left there, and I worked in publishing for a little while. I worked at Penguin Random House, which was a fun job as an executive assistant to the president and publisher, which was a very Devil Wears Prada situation. Yeah. And my boss, who I still admire, would probably, once she joked to me about that, she was like, "Do you tell your friends it's like that?" And I'm like, "No, but it is kind of like that." Yeah. No, I still have a lot of like good friends in that place and in that industry, so I'm not going to knock it. I left there to work in the not-for-profit space. I worked at Artscape in Toronto for a few years, opening Launchpad, which is, I mean, Artscape. Actually, I don't even know if Launchpad still exists because Artscape declared bankruptcy because
they're bankrupt now.
Pyramid scheme, basically.
It's kind of insane. Yeah.
Well, it was like it provided great, like needed access and housing and like studio space for artists, but kind of like at the behest and cost of artists. So it wasn't a great model. Anyway, learned a lot. And then I went and worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art when they reopened in the building in the West End.
Oh, did you work there with Freddie?
I did work there with Freddie. I think I helped train Freddie on his walkthrough.
Aww.
Yeah. Freddie was like one of the best volunteers we had. Freddie actually kept me company many of the nights I would be working an event until like 2-3 in the morning. Yeah. Anyway, so I worked there pretty much up until the pandemic. Left just before because I had an opportunity. And I should say, like, while all this is happening, I'm still freelancing on the side and like writing a lot. But I was writing more about culture, politics, and the arts at that time. I had started writing sort of like more low key, I'd say, about basketball. I started writing for David Roth of Defectors, but his old blog, which was called The Classical. And it's where a few folks who are like post Grantland, now Defector, or maybe some have just kind of scattered to the wind, but they wrote there.
R.I.P. Grantland. I still miss Grantland.
Grantland was great. But I like met a lot of people that way. And then David Roth went and like was the editorial director at Vice Sports after I had left Vice. So I did a lot of writing there. It's when I started freelancing at Dime. I started writing about the Raptors, specifically with Raptors Republic. A great like springboard for a lot of people in Toronto basketball media. Anyway, I had an opportunity with the Raptors to be their embedded feature writer. And then I also had a opportunity with the Toronto tech startup 111 to be their writer in residence. So between those two things, I was like, maybe this is how I can finally make the jump into full-time freelance writing, because I think you're always a little bit preoccupied, or at least I certainly was, with like, can this be enough to sustain life and living and income, right? And all of those very real concerns. But then the pandemic happened and I probably would have lost my job anyway, because anywhere that was like arts or visitor adjacent shut down, nobody was doing events. So that would have been that for me. And it weirdly turned into one of the more like prolific sort of snowballing times in my career, because everybody was stuck at home. So I had team people calling me, I had agents calling me, just being like, my client is very bored. Do you want to do an interview with them? You know, like because it was
That's
honestly just
awesome.
like everybody was available, right? So I had a
Yeah.
lot of like my biggest up until then kind of breakthrough interviews. I think I interviewed like Becky Hammond one day, Stan Van Gundy the next, you know. It was just like kind of bang, 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 like of chatting and like talking with people. And in a weird way, everyone was kind of on the same page. So a lot of the like, because like the in-season stuff stopped and there was so much like unknown, right? And insecurity in general. So like I hate to be like the pandemic was a great time for me because it was terrible, but it was a very humanizing time. So
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean, a
that
lot
worked
of us
for
had to make the most out of
yeah,
a bad situation. So
exactly. And I think that worked for the way that I was writing and what I wanted to write about, because it wasn't contingent on a season happening, right? And then everything just continued from there. I haven't like, you know, like to Chelsea's point, like I do feel like I still have like about 1 million jobs. I think at this moment I have 5, not including writing my own book, but like, you know, it feels strange to be like I've struck a balance, but it does feel like the most kind of holistic balance I've had in any of the work I have ever done, because there's something to be said for figuring out what you want to do and working for yourself and understanding like how to protect your own time, which I'm not necessarily the greatest at. I am getting better at it, but it's more rewarding to work for yourself and like put all that time into it because it's something that you love to be doing. So
yeah. And you can see kind of like you can see the work that you've done. Like in my head, especially this past year, I'm like, okay, that work that I was doing 2 years ago, writing for literally no money, that was like a brick that was needed to continue. It's like, you know, you're building like a house almost, that's a weird metaphor for it, but you see, because you're the one who has put in every single brick and every single thing. It's not going to some sort of corporation or whatever. It's just like you're building a body of work for yourself. And I think that's super rewarding. So yeah.
And I do generally think like people, like you meet a lot of people in all media and sports media, and like most industries, you start to realize, especially someone who's come from so many, are the same. They all have their what seem like unique problems, but they eventually are kind of all bear out to be the same underlying problems. But that said, I think coming into the space with like a very wide background has really helped and informed the work that I do within it. I think it generally makes it easier to talk to people, you know, to not see people as singular, one-dimensional. I think a lot of people in sports media, and I'm not knocking it, like there's nothing wrong with getting into it if that's always what you knew you wanted to do. Yeah. But to be able to see the wider world and relate to it and bring that into the work that you do, I think is very important.
Yeah.
I want to ask you both, what is your favorite and your least favorite part of your job today?
Like this is such a washed answer, but like now definitely the hours. Like Cathryn, I'm with you, you know, like I don't know. I don't like staying up that late anymore. Especially like if I'm working and I don't have to. And unfortunately I have become a morning person. I do a lot of my work and writing in the morning, you know, whether it's deadlines for the projects that I have, or just because that's like when I find myself up and like the most with it. So then it's like if I'm getting back from a game the night before and it's like you got like, Chelsea, you know this, like you've got your kind of like, even if it's not a particularly exciting game, like you kind of have some level of adrenaline going. It's hard to wind yourself down. Cathryn, you know that too, I'm sure, from shows, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I really just want to go to sleep.
You can't. Yeah.
And you can't. Yeah. So that's like the hours are probably like, and I'm really not complaining because I am also not in the kind of job where, you know, I have some colleagues in this business who have to be at every single game and travel, and like their schedule is out of control, and they have real lives and kids, and I don't know how they manage that, but so yeah, I'm taking mine with a grain of salt, but that's probably it.
What's your favorite part?
I think what I said before, the autonomy,
Right. Yeah.
the autonomy that I've gained through it, the amount of people I get to work with and talk to, I think that's something that I've found through any job that I've had. Like when I feel the most energized and good and like I'm very happy with the work I'm doing, it's because I'm getting to talk to X amount of people in a day about really interesting things and getting to like, and by interesting things, I just mean by virtue of like people's lived experiences. You know, everybody does have a really interesting story, especially in sports being and basketball being such a microcosm of the wider world and the drive it takes, whether you're an athlete or working in or alongside it to get in there and like stay in there, I think makes for really interesting stories. So, and I think the variety that like no two of my days really look the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chelsea, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely at like an earlier stage of my like career than Katie. So like I think the thing that gets me a lot of the time is just the like instability of it that is really frustrating. And like I'm sure, I mean, it's gonna be the same freelance media, whatever, it's just an unstable thing. But I think for me at the beginning, being more at the beginning of my career, is just like, again, trying to figure out where my next paycheck is coming from, trying to figure out. And I think there's like this weird balance of I'm far enough now where I know that I have a voice and I know that I have the, I guess, like know-how and talent to be successful. Just finding where to do that work is sometimes very frustrating. And it's often frustrating to be paid fairly for it. Because I feel like even now as a society, like we don't exactly value writers. And I think with AI and stuff coming up, it's getting worse. But like at the end of the day, like stuff like that is never going to produce the kind of writing that like, and I mean, I don't say this because you're sitting here, Katie, but like generally, like I've told you before, you're like one of my favorite people to read. So like that kind of stuff where like you're getting all these different like subsections of like sports and culture and things that matter and trying to intersect all of this, like you don't get that from just anyone. And so trying to prove that is quite frustrating, while also trying to like pay your rent and be a human and buy groceries.
Live in Toronto.
And so I definitely like 2023 for me was definitely one of those years where I was like, I just had to push through because I knew something was coming. But at the same time, I was like eating rice cakes from the dollar store most days. And it was just like a very rough time. So yeah, like the money aspect and the stability of it is definitely frustrating. But then to flip it on what's best and why I keep doing this and why I don't want to just get like a normal, 9-to-5 job is because like it's just so fulfilling to me. Like I don't think I've ever loved anything more than I love getting to write stories and talk to people and interview and take people's lived experiences and make them into like a 800 1,000 word piece that people can read and remember. And and when people kind of say like, oh, I read this piece of yours or this or whatever, and like people actually remember that, I'm like, oh, okay. And I think this past year has really been, getting the WNBA team, I think for me has been such a motivator because like for the past like 3 years, there's been like maybe 5 to 10 people in this country talking about getting a WNBA team here and seriously and trying to push it and working in American spaces. And like, I'm so grateful to be one of them. And so like to now see the benefit of that and see how the community is growing, it just makes you feel like you're doing something meaningful. And I think because I am someone who doesn't like to just write about the X's and O's of basketball, like I am very, very interested in all those different intersectionalities that we've been talking about. It just makes it feel a little bit more important and makes it feel, again, like there's just so much out there to dig into when it comes to these athletes and this sport and this culture and the way that everything intersects with each other. And so, yeah, I think just to bring it all down, it's just fulfilling and the autonomy is great. I was able to take a month off this summer and just like go away and like with zero repercussions because I could just work. Like that is just like, it makes it worth it. It makes the fact that I ate rice cakes last year and got terrible vitamin B12 deficiency worth it. You know, so certain things like that. But yeah,
Listen, send your vitamin B12s to Chelsea, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, now we get a shot and we're good now. I
Okay.
have every vitamin in the book. My doctor was like, please eat meat. And I was like, okay. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to like give off the impression that it's all just like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy I get to like write for basketball and go to games and whatever. Like, it's hard. Like, it's hard and you have to really be passionate about it. And I think what I'm learning now is that like, if I keep doing the work that I want to do, it seems like hopefully it's going to pay off. So yeah, I guess that's my favorite part, is that it just feels really, every victory just feels a little bit sweeter because I feel like I just put everything into it.
Yeah, it is paying off and it will continue to pay off. Absolutely. I want to ask you both, what is your favorite player interaction?
There've been a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
We already talked about Clay once, Cathryn, so I don't.
We really talked about Clay.
We'll talk about Clay again.
I'm going to need an update next week.
Yeah.
Because he's in town on Saturday.
I think for me, like one of the ones that still stands out is probably one of the earliest in-person interviews I did. Just because he like saved me and he has like such a spot in my heart for that. But it was Mike Conley, because I was so nervous to talk to him. I don't know. I was just like it's like early days of going into locker rooms and chatting with people. And I don't necessarily, like, admittedly, like the way I write, I don't necessarily go into things knowing exactly, like I have a general idea.
Yeah.
But it's not like, oh, I'm writing a story about 3-point shooting efficiency and I'll ask all these, players the same question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what a lot of people do. It's like one way to get the answer that you want, or like the quote you want, rather. So I don't even remember what I wanted to talk to him about. Maybe like longevity, stability, like the foofy stuff I like to talk about. And I just kind of blanked. And like this happens too. Like you just blank in the middle of like either you've asked a question and then you're like, oh God, I don't know what my follow-up is going to be. Now I'm better at just being more conversational about it. But I think then I was more like, oh shoot, like I've just totally forgotten what my second question was, and it was like pre-game, which a lot of guys don't like talking pre-game. But Mike Conley was just like, I remember he was just like sitting there. He's like one of the first guys, like first lockers in the locker room. And he just kind of looked up and was like, oh, hi. And like introduced himself. I'm like, I know who you are. Mike Conley, and yeah, we just like, I asked him one thing I totally forgot. And he was kind of like giving me prompts. He was like, oh, but like, like that could lead to this and da, 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 da. And we ended up having a very nice conversation. I don't think I feel like my heart was like audible.
Yeah.
With how hard it was like racing throughout. But like I always knew he was a very nice guy. Like everybody has their like kind Mike Conley story. But yeah, that one like definitely stands out for me. Because after that, I was like, oh, there's such a good rush in these situations for talking to someone. And maybe you don't necessarily what's going to come out of it, but just because you're sort of nervous to do something is no reason not to.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
A lesson for everything.
Aw, that's a really sweet story. Chelsea, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the nerves. Like I remember going to Raptors games at first and just like not wanting to talk to anyone, whether that was coaches, players, the other media people. Like I was very scared. But last year I just like randomly got the opportunity to interview Candace Parker, and it was over Zoom. Like it wasn't in person, but I just remember, again, it was at this point where I was so just like defeated at where my career was and where my life was, and was so like broke and sad, honestly, like not to be all glum. But then I got this opportunity to interview Candace Parker, and it was for one of those like brand things where she was promoting like protein shakes and whatever, but they let me ask a few like other random questions. And like she is just like one of my favorite players, one of the most impactful players, one of the first people to like be an actual like mother and keep playing and do all that stuff, right? And so I remember leading up to the interview, I was so nervous, like just so nervous. Like didn't know what I was like. I obviously had planned, but like I'd never really done anything like that before. And I get into the Zoom meeting and it's her and like 10 execs, and I didn't realize I was going to be asking all my questions in front of all of these people.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And like was so nervous, and she was just so nice. Like, she was like, was so like vocal about her answers. Like, I mean, we all know, like, sometimes you interview a player and they just are like, yeah, no, whatever. Like, they just don't really give you anything. But she would just give so many answers and was so like open to my questions that weren't necessarily about the campaign. And I just remember like getting off of that Zoom call and sobbing because all of the pent up energy that I had, like, because I had like a week in advance to prepare, and like all of that just like energy that I'd been storing and nerves and all of that. And then I just like finished it, and I was like, I just talked to Candace Parker. Like, I just spoke to her and she heard my voice and we had a conversation. Like, and then I sobbed, and then I went and got myself a Cinnabon. And then it was also the night of the NBA draft, so then I watched the NBA draft and like,
and sobbed again.
Yeah.
But I just remember like the feeling of like relief and like pride, and like when it came out, I was so excited because I was like she means so much to so many people, including myself, and like the fact that I got to write something about her and quote her and have this conversation with her, it just like was such an affirmation of like the path I was on, and such like and she was just so nice. Like, it's like, they don't like meet your heroes, but if your heroes are women's basketball players, like you're not gonna have too much of a problem, because most of them that I've met have been super, super kind. So yeah, that was, I think because it was the first big one, and it was her, and it was, and now I look back and I'm like, she was so close to retiring, and like I got in like right before her kind of thing. So yeah, it was a nice moment.
I will say there is like something very different interviewing and speaking with WNBA players than there is to NBA players. I don't know what it is. I just like generally had like better, more in depth, like easier conversations. I do think probably it's because a lot of them are just used to like having to be more candid and honest to get their stories told and across. They're a bit more well-traveled. They're just like out in the world and aren't necessarily so coddled, right? And have had like this notion of treating themselves as a brand since they've been in high school, and protect, like that kind of protectionism that comes with it. Yeah, there's just like generally way more, like I remember interviewing Sylvia Fowles for like a story I wrote for Flagrant about her period. And like we were, because there's a story about like why don't, like, basically just like how little women's periods are studied in athletes, and how much more susceptible women are, at all the different stages in your cycle to injury, like things like injury, but also deficiency, and how teams and athletes kind of cope with that through like training, recovery, everything. And she was so funny. She was just like, yeah, I got my period kit, I got my bag, I got my tart cherry juice in there, I got everything I need. And she was like, I'm telling the other like girls, like they got to get their kits together. I don't know. So it's like also just generally like one of the coolest people.
Oh yeah.
She like does macrame. She has this like crazy Phantom, Rolls Royce Phantom. She has like millions of houseplants.
Like a funeral business.
Yeah.
She went to school, for funerary services for her like post-career.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, she's sick. She's a very cool person. Yeah. She's very funny.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, Teresa Weatherspoon told me to have a wonderful day, and I've taken that still every day. I'm like, Teresa told me to,
so you have to.
Yeah.
They're just like, exactly incredible. Every point that you said, and they're all just so kind. And so like I've interviewed a few of the like Canadian women's national team players, and they are just like so wonderful and so good about being like, they like, I could DM them and ask them for anything. They're like, yeah, totally. Like, and so like,
I think they just know. They like know that like so much of the, like they're intrinsic to growing this sport that they love, right? Like it goes hand in hand. And I think it affects them so directly. Whereas I think it's so much more removed from NBA players, right? It's like An example I gave somebody recently was like, why, they were like, why are W players more like politically engaged or just like outspoken? It's like, because all these things affect them directly in their day-to-day lives, when like a huge percentage of the league is queer and Black. And it's like these problems like affecting them, especially in the States, right? Like it's so much different than when LeBron, not that he didn't mean it, but when LeBron's like, you got to vote. It's like, his day-to-day life doesn't necessarily change that much by the incoming administration.
Right.
Whereas like, WNBA athletes aren't really that like far removed from the real world that the rest of us live in.
Exactly. Yeah. Up until a few years ago, didn't get like so much of the treatment and all of that stuff that the NBA got. So yeah, they've definitely had to like be a very crucial part of their own growth, and like have had to like tell their own stories and kind of promote themselves and all that. So I feel like that's why they're a little bit more willing. And I think they also just like a little bit more. I'm not saying NBA players don't want us to succeed as media, but like I find sometimes when I get into an interview with a WNBA player and it's like woman to woman, like they're trying to do their thing, I'm trying to do my thing. They're super kind about it. They're like, yeah, and like they'll read your work and they'll engage with it. Like every profile or story I've written about a WNBA player, they've shared it. They've posted on their stories. Their parents text me about it. Like it's a whole thing. Like I remember one of the first profiles I wrote was Natalie Achanwa, and her mom messaged me and was like, "This was so good," and I was like,
"Oh, that's so sweet."
Yeah, they're just like I said, it's a little bit more. There's less of a gap, I think, between like what we're doing and what they're doing.
Yeah. To wrap this up, we're gonna have a special Hottie Highlight of the week here. Not really of the week, more of our lives. Yes. And the question I have proposed to the two of you is, if growing up, did you have an athlete crush? And if so, who were they?
Yes, I did. So my family was big hockey people. And my dad was so randomly became a Montreal Canadiens fan when he moved to Canada, even though he never lived in Montreal. But I think it was like his uncle or something was a Montreal Canadiens fan. And so when he got to Canada, that was just the team that he went with. So anyway, big Montreal Canadiens house growing up. And when I was like a teenager was when Carey Price started playing for the Canadiens. Goalie was like this young kid from Canada, like kind of like home country kid. And he was really cute, and my entire family. Carey Price, yeah.
You're Googling
him? Yeah. I don't know who he is.
You have to Google like 2012 Carey Price.
No, he's 37.
Yeah.
He's not old.
He's not.
That's not old.
So, yeah, it was funny though, because it was like me, my sisters, and my mom, and we were all like Carey Price, and my brother would have these like huge posters of him in his room. But yeah, Carey Price is definitely the first one that comes to mind because we were big Montreal Canadiens people, and when he came to the team, we were all like, yeah,
he's got a very like Clark Kent kind of look, but without the glasses.
Like he's like a cowboy vibe, which like is not my vibe now, but I don't know. The Cambridge with Me came out for that one. But, yeah,
that's fair. Katie, yourself?
Like growing up, it was definitely Dennis Rodman.
Ooh.
Well, I think like I've told this story before, but that Pistons team, like the bad boy era Pistons team, was pretty formative for one, like my entry into basketball in general, for like liking and following a team, and it's now still why I have such a vested like personal interest in the Pistons succeeding. Like they're probably saw on some days as much as like share as much of my fandom as with the Raptors, anyway. And I think he was also sort of like, he was one of those early celebrities where like he touched all these facets like outside of sports, right? He was a cultural icon. He was a bit of a disruptor. Well, like of like at the time, like
major disruptor. Yeah.
Disruptor. He like was really into fashion. He was like very like adjacent to kind of like a very like early punk aesthetic that I liked too. So it just, I think
Anna at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was just like, he was kind of all things. And I
Carmen
obviously,
Electra.
and that is like how I like to approach any one thing of like trying to explode it open and seeing what else it touches. And I guess is like a walking version of that. Dennis Rodman was that. And I don't know. He was just like, he just seemed like the coolest. He still seems very cool, but he seemed like in that time just like the coolest.
No, he seems absolutely nuts now. I wouldn't classify him as cool now. He seems a little.
I mean, I want the best for him.
Yeah, I want the best for him.
And and like maybe he was just as nuts then. You just didn't really see past the veneer of how cool it seemed like to do whatever you wanted. Like,
this is true.
time,
this is true. My my mom had a crush on Dennis Rodman growing up, and that just ruined it for me.
Right. Yeah.
Like I was like, I can't.
The only other athlete I can think of, I had like this is like super niche, but like because I used to be a competitive show jumper, and like Ian Miller, it was like Canada's like big like show jumping athlete and the team.
Ian Miller?
Yeah, I didn't have a crush on him. He's quite old. But his son, yeah, it's not Ian.
He's more than 47.
Yeah, it's not Ian. I was like, wait for it.
Wait,
No, I did meet him once, and I was like pretty starstruck. It was very cool. Actually, I met him twice. I met him once when I was like 6, and then again, like I don't know, 7 years ago. So he's still going. Anyway, his son Jonathan, I had like a very brief crush on, to the point where like my mom and I would go to the Royal Winter Fair every year growing up, and to watch show jumping, right? And then
I mean, I don't know anything about the equestrian scene, so maybe he's
quite
like
tall.
Maybe he's like good looking for an equestrian.
There's not that many bad boys like in the equestrian scene, unfortunately.
So but just in a quick Google search, I don't see it for myself personally. But I'm happy.
There's also when someone is like
riding, not a judgmental space,
like riding a horse and like doing something that like you used to be good at, and you know how like difficult it can be if someone is good at that thing. It's like it's very impressive. Anyway, when my husband started coming to the Royal with my mom and I after we met, and I'd be like, "Where's Jonathan?" He'd be like, "Stop it." Stop looking for him.
Oh yeah. Also another one that's
really
so
funny
for me, because I am a Portuguese child who grew up in Cambridge, Ontario. Everyone was obsessed with Cristiano Ronaldo, which like now I'm like, but
isn't he? He's pretty fucking evil, right? Is it him? Yeah.
Is he?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I don't know anything about him.
Didn't he assault someone?
I think so.
He sexually assaulted someone? Yeah.
Not all these crushes.
Is it him? He has like the spiky hair.
But then so like that was
spiky hair?
Is it? I'm thinking of the right guy. Okay.
He had a faux hawk. So then in like 2005, Cambridge, Ontario, every kid on the block had a faux hawk.
Yeah, that's the
look. That kind of ruined it for me. Yeah. And then
is Cambridge like very Portuguese?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's like if you ask like Blake Murphy and like anybody else who grew up in Cambridge about like the Portuguese people, it's a lot. But anyway, so then I grew up and started realizing that he was like kind of not a good person. If I'm not going to go too much into that because my family is still like Cristiano Ronaldo and he has an airport named after him and all of that stuff. But he was, every kid on the block was a Cristiano Ronaldo stan when I was growing up. And he could play soccer well, so that was what mattered.
Who was yours, Cathryn?
Yeah.
Well, there was Vince Carter. That's boring, but we all know
that's true. That's true.
Yeah, but then
he still got it too. He's so handsome.
That's a crush that ages very well.
Yeah.
Definitely him. The other one is you probably don't know, a tennis player, Australian, named Patrick Rafter. Google Patrick Rafter. He's still good looking for an older man.
Spelled like the
Rafter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the thing in your ceiling.
Yeah.
Patrick
Rafter.
This might be the Jonathan Miller for me. Yeah.
That's
I don't see
fine.
it, but I see
maybe like a younger photo of him. He used to have like long hair.
He has long hair now.
Yeah, he has long hair now. Long hair, facial hair, Patrick Rafter. That's the only obscure one that I can think of. Otherwise, it was just Vince And here we are today. I'll tell you, you got to wrap this up, but I'll tell you a quick Vince Carter crush story.
Yeah.
So, and maybe I've told this on the pod before, so apologies to the longtime listeners, and I appreciate you all very much. Freddie gives me a hard time for sometimes telling the same story, and I'm like, well, stop reminding me of the same things.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I was 13, I think it was like Vince's like rookie season or something. But anyway, I was obsessed. And back then, like take a sign to the game, right? So I made a sign that said Vince, take it to the playoffs. But then I color coded the letters, so it also said Vince, take it off.
That's so creative, truly.
Thank you. And I grew up to become a writer, so but it was like I was too young to have such a sign.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't like 13 trying to be like some sort of like groupie, like badass. Like I was like the biggest nerd at that age. And I would have screamed at him like he was like a Backstreet Boy or something. Like there was no like, there was none of that. But like me and my friend Holly, we went with this sign and everyone just thought we were the most obnoxious girls ever, because like he'd be at the free throw line and everyone's quiet and I'll like scream at the top of my lungs because I'll be like, I want him to hear me.
Yeah.
I want him to know I exist. So I was just being like the worst fan, but also having like the best time.
I love that.
But that sign, no one's letting their kid go to a game with that sign now.
Yeah,
No.
I wish I would. But
at the time, my parents were like, no one's going to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And no one did. But yeah,
things it did. That was like my parents sending me to a Snoop Dogg concert at the same age. Like it just didn't hit the same back in the day. I'm not sure they really knew who Snoop Dogg was at the time, but
yeah, I don't think my parents knew half of the lyrics I was listening to as a kid, but thank God for that. We should wrap this up. Thank you everyone so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this very special, what I'm calling a holiday edition of this show, while I'm hopefully having a good time in Italy and not freaking out over the fact that I may or may not have a credit card because I've lost it and there's a postal strike and I'm really I hate it. Anyway, thank you all so much. Chelsea, we'll start with you. Let us know what you're up to and where we can find you on the internets.
Yeah, my handle is at Chelsea Leite, but right now I'm writing obviously for Raptors HQ. And then when it comes to women's basketball, I have a weekly podcast on Her Hoop Stats. I do a weekly column, actually 2 weekly columns on Fansided about the WNBA and women's college basketball. And then I'm also writing on a few different posts or a few different sites about Unrivaled. So that's coming up. And yeah, WNBA expansion, all that fun stuff. So yeah, you can find most of my work at my handle.
Amazing. And Katie?
Just online, dude.
Love it. Just working her 5 jobs as we always do. Thank you everyone so much.
Just Google me.
SEO, baby.
You can also Google me. I have a website that needs updating, but we're out here. Thanks again. Remember to like, subscribe. I should have said that off the top. I need to have it on a sticky note in front of me so I'll remember. Listen, I lost my credit card a week before my vacation. Don't, this is who I am. This is why I'm single. Okay. That and the fact that my mom liked Dennis Rodman. Not the best example. Give us a like, give us a positive review, all that good stuff, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.